Hi, and welcome to our presentation on Ethics in the Workplace for English 112 Basic Composition 2 with Speech. I'm Professor Holly Johnson, and let's get started. One of the first questions we should have is, what are ethics? A lot of people don't know what the term really means. They've heard it before, but they're not exactly sure. Ethics refers to how we apply the moral principles that we use to conduct our individual or group behavior. So, what does that mean? In order to figure out what our moral principles are, we need to know what that means. So, morals are the principles of right and wrong behavior that are agreed upon by society. So here are some examples. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't hurt others, don't steal, speak respectfully to your superiors, and so on. These are pretty much agreed upon around the world, doesn't matter what culture you're from. Where do these morals come from? They basically come from organized religion. Religions used to have very strict codes of moral behavior. Many still do. Many people are extremely observant, and they observe these religious codes. But even people who are never involved in religion, who just go about their daily lives, maybe they're atheists or maybe they just don't have any religion, they still use morality to determine what's right and wrong behavior, and you're taught that from when you're a little kid. Don't hit people, and so it's become separated from religion, even though these things do have religious roots. So that's just something to be aware of. All right, here's a strange thing. A lot of laws are based on ethical principles, which are in turn are based on morals, like we just talked about. But if something is unethical, it's usually illegal, but not everything that's illegal is unethical. That seems a little weird, but let me give you some examples. Here's an example. Let's say I'm in Princeton. I want to go have lunch with you. We sit down. I found a parking spot. I was so lucky. But my parking meter ran out while we were having lunch. Next thing I know, I've got a ticket. Now, I've technically broken the law because I stayed in a spot past the expired time. Okay? And I'm going to have to pay a fine because I did that. There's a law about how long you can park in a place, and I didn't abide by it. But I'm still an ethical person. Here's another example. If you're a cop and you pull an unarmed man from a car, and this is a picture here from the Rodney King beating, which many of you may not remember, but it was in the 1990s and it happened in Los Angeles. This guy got pulled out of his car and a number of cops just beat him, sort of unconscious for no particular reason. I think they said he was speeding, but instead of writing him a ticket, 5 cops beat him senseless. Obviously, it's unethical to harm people. It's certainly unethical to do it deliberately, and especially if it's a person that can't fight back. It's also illegal, right? We were talking about law and ethics, so obviously this is illegal and unethical. But let's think about this again from a different perspective. Go to the next slide. If you think about the person who took the videotape of Rodney King being beaten, he stood by and he didn't rush in to help. Instead, he kept filming. Now, on the one hand, that film ended up being used in court, and it made it very clear what had happened. On the other hand, and so that was very helpful for that reason, but on the other hand, if King had died, this person would have just been a witness to a murder that he didn't do anything to prevent. So this situation shows what we call an ethical dilemma, which means a situation where whatever choice you make, it may end up being unethical, and you can hardly tell which choice is going to be better. And these kinds in the workplace, every time you have to make a decision about what the right thing to do is, you're applying ethics. So let's give you a few examples. All right. Here's a guy. He's trying to make some decisions. We're going to look at the green bubble first. He's overheard the staff in accounting talking about taking just a little off the top. All right. Should he tell his boss that they may be embezzling money? Well, a little off the top could mean anything, right? It may not necessarily mean that they're taking money off of the top of anything. It may mean that they got a haircut over the weekend. So you can't go in with incomplete information that is just sort of some sort of rumor or something you overheard. So the ethical thing to do there is certainly not to draw attention to something that could be perfectly innocent. Okay. Now we're going to look at the pink bubble. Walt keeps asking me to pick up his dry cleaning. Will I get fired if I say no? We're going to assume Walt is some sort of supervisor or superior. Okay. Obviously, in this situation, you don't want to bring attention to the fact that somebody's asking you to do something that they shouldn't be because they don't want to get fired. On the other hand, letting people keep doing that is harming you. So that's the sort of situation where it's an ethical dilemma. In most cases where people are asking you to do, parts of the job that you weren't asked to do originally when you were hired, it's best to bring it to the attention of a supervisor above them so that somebody can help you figure out how to deal with it. Then the blue bubble, should we fire Lucia? She's not great at her job, but she has 3 kids to feed. That's tricky too. If you're a supervisor who has a chance to fire somebody and that's, that may be part of your job and you feel like, gosh, I have some obligation to the company to make sure that I take care of the company's best interests. And on the other hand, I don't want to hurt this person who needs a job. In this case, the best thing to There's a lot of pressure in the workplace, and when your paycheck depends on the choices that you make, it can be hard even for really good people to always make the right decisions. And we talked about ethical dilemmas. Sometimes even making the right decision may be harmful to somebody some way, one way or another. So it can be really tricky. So let's think about it a little bit more, how we make these decisions. You have to have good character to make good ethical decisions. That means you need to be trustworthy, respectful, responsible, fair, caring, have good citizenship. Okay. Now, we all like to think we have all these things, but we all probably, if we think about it in our hearts, know that there are times when we haven't had all these traits. Maybe we wish we had, but we don't. The really ethical person is somebody who's constantly striving to do better in all of these areas. However, you're still going to have to make decisions, so let's think about the actual steps for those decisions. Here we go. There are 7 basic steps for ethical decision making. We're going to go through them one by one. You can read this list. Go ahead and pause it if you need to, but we're going to take them one at a time. Let's go to the next slide. First one, it seems obvious, stop and think. In some situations, like the Rodney King beating, you may not have time to stop and think. You have your video camera and you start taping and you're just doing what you're doing before you even have a chance to think about it. So some ethical decisions have to be made very quickly, but if you have time to stop and think, you absolutely should. When you're thinking, one of the things you're thinking about is your long-term goals. Instant gratification often leads to unethical decisions, like, hey, I could just take the company credit card and, use it for something I want to buy. Nobody's going to notice, right? Obviously, thinking for yourself in the short term, something you want, is going to be harmful. Whereas thinking, I really want to be an ethical person and I want to be able to sleep well at night, may mean. The next thing is determining the facts. We talked about how if you overheard a conversation at work, it sounded like somebody might be doing something bad, but you can't tell. You're going to still have to find out the rest of the facts before you do anything. So, for example, in workplace, you may find someone else is cheating or behaving unethically, and you feel like you're obliged to turn them in to be ethical, but you can't just act on suspicion. You have to have all the facts, or as many facts as you could possibly get before you let anybody know about it. Once you've gathered all the facts, stopped, thought about it, considered the consequences, then you have to think about the options. One thing you could do is do nothing about the situation. You could gather more information, or you could try and do the right thing, whatever the right thing might seem to be under those circumstances. And oftentimes, doing nothing can be just as dangerous and harmful as doing something. So don't always think that doing nothing is kind of the easy way out. Not always the case. The next thing you do, again, is sort of like thinking about the future, is considering the consequences. Are there any items on your list that would require lying, cheating, stealing, and hurting others, being disrespectful? If that's on your list, then just cross it off, because you can be sure that those things aren't ethical. Ask yourself, like, how would you feel if everybody knew what the decision was that you made? And if it's a decision that only looks good when nobody else knows about it, it's usually the wrong choice. Step 6, at some point, you have to choose and just make a decision about how you're going to handle something. I think that one of the best things you can do is find a mentor, somebody who you trust, whether it's, an uncle or your mom or your best friend or your boyfriend, whoever it is that has good character themselves, because they exhibit really good trustworthiness, respectfulness. They make good decisions. They don't lie. They don't cheat. They're the kind of people who can help you choose wisely. Talk to those people who you respect and trust before you make your decision. Because we often have to act with imperfect information, what happens as a consequence sometimes may turn out badly. Other times it may be very good and brings things to a better place. But an ethical person just monitors the decisions they've made over time, sees where they went wrong, and tries to correct the errors and do better in the future. Here's some quick tips. Resist the urge to pass tough decisions on to someone else and say, oh, they'll know what to do. Because basically, you may be the boss one day and then you'll have to make the decisions. And if all you've ever said is, I'll let the boss decide how to handle this, you're not going to know what to do when the time comes. Sometimes you have to choose between what we call the lesser of two evils, which means that there's no choice that won't hurt someone. And in such cases, the best choice is generally the one that hurts the fewest people. But every different situation is a little bit different. In terms of what the most ethical possible thing, noble thing you could do is, usually sacrificing yourself in one way or another is seen as like the most noble thing. If the circumstances demand it. On the other hand, they usually don't. So, but that's just something to bear in mind. One good way to get used to making tough ethical decisions is to practice it. So think about an ethical problem and then think about how you would solve it. I teach journalism and we have ethical issues that come up all the time. Like if you're writing a review of a restaurant and you get there and you let it slip that that's what you're up to, and suddenly they try and give you the meal for free. Well, you can't take the free meal because it would look to other people like maybe they were buying a good review from you, when really you have to give just an unbiased review. So that's something that happens to us a lot. So being firm and saying, no, I can't take free food, that's an ethical situation that happens to reporters. So you can think of another one probably from your own experience and think about how you handled it or how you would handle it and think about whether or not that would work. Okay, I think you're set now. Let's think about some other ethical issues in the workplace and get ready to handle them.